We're going to make a Gusher Keyhole pad today. So I have my 2 topper fabrics. You can use whatever fabrics you want that are suitable for toppers. Both of mine are cotton woven. I'm going to trace my pattern on the back. Ignore all my wrinkles. I needed to do this video very quickly. Normally I would have ironed this fabric ahead of time. Please iron. It just makes your life so much easier. Of course, using washable markers. I always cut extra around it so I wiggle room. And I'm going to do the same for the core liner or pattern. Sorry, it's kind of off the camera here. There we go. Now you can see it. So this is just a rough template because we're going to be drawing it on the other side here in just a minute. So now I'm going to take my core and center it the best I can on the back side of the topper. We're going to be cutting this out, and you're going to want to leave a seam allowance of like 1/2 inch somewhere in there. You don't have to do this with pinking shears or anything like that because you're going to trim it here in just a minute. So I am using a flannel for the other layer. So basically you're going to have 2 layers for your topper fabric that will be the outside of the pad. You can use whatever you want. You can use something really thin like gauze or even like a peak fabric, anything like that if you want something real thin. But I only have flannel in hand. And it's pink, so ignore the color, but you don't even really see it. So I'm pinning all the way around outside of it, and then we're going to sew inside on that line. You don't have to leave a turn hole because we're going to be trimming it and flipping it here in just a minute. So sew right on that line, straight stitch. Make sure you lock in your stitches. Pull out your pins. Obviously never sew through pins. So just a second here. We are going to take our pinking shears and we're going to trim around the whole inside, trimming really close to those threads just like you would the outside of a pad before you flip it. Make sure to not clip into the threads, just really close. That will relieve the pressure on the fabric and make turning it look prettier and be a whole lot easier for you. If you don't have pinking shears, use regular scissors and snip into the curves. So this is a tricky part. Be patient with this. So you're going to flip it to where your outside fabric will be on the top and the hidden fabric will be underneath. It will fight you the whole way. So if you iron after this step, it makes life a lot easier. But again, I didn't have enough time, so I skipped this step and it made my life so much harder. Just keep working with it, pin or clip as you go. I didn't have any clips, so I'm using pins. Just keep working with it, small sections at a time. Eventually, it will get easier. So now we're going to top stitch. You can skip this step and do this later all in one, but I didn't iron ahead of time, so it would have really made my life difficult. So I chose to top stitch right now, and then I'm going to sew right over this line later on. But you can skip this step and just leave it clipped and do it all in one step when you sew like the core part on. It's totally up to you. There's no right or wrong here. It's whatever works best for you. Lock in your stitches. All right, half the topper's done. So now I'm going to retrace my pattern on the back of the flannel. And if you're smart here, you would have one whole pattern, but I got one of the free CCO patterns from the donors group that someone made, and I only printed out one because I like to make my life difficult. So here we have flannel. I did 4 layers of flannel. That's what I like to do for gushers. That's what I cut through 3 of them, and then I leave the last one sewn to the core. This is a bamboo fleece. You can do as many layers of flannel as you want. If you're just making it like a moderate, you don't even have to add an extra fabric on the back. Again, there's no right or wrong. So I'm just making sure it fits in there. Tracing my pattern on the front like we talked about earlier. So now I'm cutting through all of my rectangles just because it makes life easier, but you don't have to do that. It's just an easier thing to do for me. So you're going to take 1 layer of the flannel and I sew my absorbent bamboo fleece onto the back of that one. That will be the very back of my cloth pad. I like to do a zigzag stitch with that, so it just keeps fabrics from rolling. So now I take my handy dandy piece of paper. You can use a ruler, anything you want. Just draw straight lines. Make sure they're at a diagonal so your fabric doesn't have really long pieces of thread that come when it frays. You want it to fray, but not a ton, right? Like just the perfect amount. So just so you don't have to lock in your stitches here. I did for some of mine, and then I realized I was running out of thread. So I decided to not lock them in because you're going to be sewing over this whole thing anyways. Straight stitch all the way down. Make them as close or as far apart as you want. There's no right or wrong. And then you're going to cut through the topper and 3 layers, or however many layers as you have. Just leave that back layer not cut through. I realized I wanted to add one more slit at the bottom too, so I quickly sewed that up. I did try that little tool. I didn't like how it looked, so I went back to scissors. Scissors was totally fine. It was really easy to do this way. This way is a whole lot easier than doing regular gushers, trying to cut through all those layers. So now they're all cut. We're going to lay our topper on top, center it the best we can, try to use those little marker lines from earlier. Make sure when you sew this together that your gusher part underneath is not all like flipped up. Make sure they're all laying nice and flat, and that will keep your bulk down in your pad. This is a bulkier pad. It's just like a gusher, so it tends to be a little bit thicker than a normal pad, but this also has 2 different topper fabrics, so it does have slightly more bulk, but I think it's a peace of mind thing, you know? More layers, more absorbency. So again, I'm stitching right on top of that line, following it from before. If you did not top stitch that before, now you would be sewing everything together. So just make sure all your layers are lined up and you can't see your underneath fabric. Make sure you don't sew over any pins. Lock into place. Trim any threads. Admire your work. Now we're going to go underneath and trim the extra pieces of the core because I like to do big rectangles. If you are very precise and you cut out your core perfectly, you don't have to do this step. It just makes centering it a little bit more difficult, but again, it is totally up to you how you want to do this. There's no right or wrong. She's beautiful already. I'm so excited. Okay, so I'm doing a hidden PUL backer with this one with a piece of fleece. So my fleece is really, really thin fleece from Joann Fabrics. It would probably do just fine as a backer on its own, but because this is such a heavy absorbency pad and I'm going to be auctioning this off in the CCO fundraising auction, I really wanted to make it very water resistant. So I did a hidden PUL layer. So essentially, this is going to have 2 backers and 2 toppers. So this is a little bit of a thicker pad, but she's going to hold all night for you. So I pin all my layers together, make sure they're not going to shift around. I did my turn hole at the very bottom, but depends on where your pattern is. Just make sure your turn hole is on a nice straight edge on your cloth pad. It will just make life so much easier. Pulling out pins, making sure you're not sewing over them, adjusting any layers if you need to, if they feel like they're shifting. Go right on that line and right back. Make sure you leave a decent turn hole. Don't make your life harder. So here I'm going to use 2 different scissors. I always do my turn hole at an angle. You don't have to do that, whatever works for you. So I'm using regular scissors, and then I'm going to use my pinking shear so you can see the difference. There's not a big difference when you flip it. You cannot tell which side is which. So with my regular scissors, I make sure I snip into the curves. So here you can see all of the layers, the 2 toppers and the 2 backers. You're going to go right in between them and flip. Get yourself a chopstick or something like that. This is my little magic wand I use for sewing. Help push out all those curves and corners. I snip out the inner 2 layers, the pink flannel and the PUL, just so my turn hole is a little bit thinner. And then you're just going to top stitch like a regular pad, however far you like to go, 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch away, whatever you want to do. Just top stitch around the whole thing. Adjusting your turn hole as needed, making sure your fabric's all lined up. And she's done. Beautiful, so soft. I do love how wide the gusher layer goes on this from end to end. It gives you a huge wide opening and will catch all that flow. So I hope you like this video. If you'd like any other videos or if you have questions, let me know. Have fun sewing.